Florida State is 4-0 and ranked top 5 in the country. Now, I want to start by addressing some concerns. I know some people are worried about the lack of recruiting buzz, especially when compared to a few other programs like Florida and Miami. And what I'll say to that is Florida State has played one home game so far this season versus Florida and Miami, who have hosted 3 home games in the first month, including one of Miami's games when they hosted a ranked Texas A&M team, and Florida hosting Tennessee, who was ranked 11 at that time in the Swamp. The one home game Florida State has played was against Southern Miss, so not exactly a marquee matchup to draw in a lot of big names. That being said, Florida State has a bye week this week, and the coaches will be going on the road to visit a few Florida State's commits and their targets, including a number of guys who we're going to talk about in this video. I definitely think these next few weeks of home games for Florida State, you'll start to see some big visits finally starting to happen. Hopefully, even if you guys start to pop and commit. So in this video, I thought I'd just go over some of the top recruits that are left in the 2024 class that FSU is looking to add between now and signing day, and just kind of talk about where things stand overall for this 2024 recruiting class. Now, before we dive in, I'm not saying that all these guys are guaranteed to sign or even commit to Florida State at any point. And in fact, some of these players are actually already committed to other programs. So Florida State will have to work extra hard on some of these guys to pull off a flip. This list is just the main big targets that Florida State is still in heavy pursuit of and still has a potential shot to a good shot of landing. And a lot of these guys we've talked about in past videos as well, so let's go ahead and dive into it. Number one, of course, is number one on everybody's list is 5-star wide receiver Jeremiah Smith, who is currently committed to Ohio State. Now, Florida State has picked up some real steam here in this recruitment, and it's been pretty consistent interest in Florida State from Smith for a while now. He's visited a few times this past spring and summer, and even made it to Orlando to watch Florida State beat LSU in blowout fashion. It made it that much better that the receiving game that night went absolutely nuts, with 2 receivers having over 100 yards receiving, and then, of course, Keon Coleman hauling in 3 touchdowns in that game. Smith actually even tweeted about Keon Coleman saying, "Number 4 is that boy." Now, Smith has been pretty open about how much the on-field product means to him, so it's huge for Florida State to have him see that kind of offensive firepower in person. Of course, a major receiver target like him wants to see that he'll be a featured piece in a top offense in the country. Now, it sounds like Smith will be visiting Florida State at least 2 or 3 more times in between now and signing day. It sounds like he'll take at least one unofficial visit to a game this season, but I believe he also has plans to take an official visit in December, which is huge in my opinion. Hopefully, if things go like we expect / hope they will, Florida State will hopefully have at least made the playoffs, and at that point, there'll be some major hype. But you also just love getting a late visit like that, potentially even the last visit before he has to put pen to paper on signing day. So hopefully Florida State can make a move in between now and then, but I definitely think that he may be much more likely than initially thought back in April or May. The next big fish on the board is 4-star or potentially 5-star, depending on where you look, defensive lineman LJ McCray out of Mainland High School in Daytona Beach. He's already pretty much college ready, coming in at 6'6", 260 pounds. So I believe he's being recruited to Florida State as a true interior defensive lineman. But he does play some edge for his high school team, so maybe kind of ends up in like a Dennis Brigg kind of role where he plays inside but can flex out a lot of times as well. On the defensive side of the ball especially, I think this is your most important recruit left. This seems to be a Florida State, Florida, Georgia battle. The opinion seems to be split on who leads. Right now, I think if he's a take at Georgia, then he probably ends up there. But Florida State is firmly in the mix. Like I mentioned, Florida is in there too, but they already kind of have a crowded defensive line room, while Florida State is actually super thin at that position right now recruiting-wise. Florida State will get his last official visit in October for the Virginia Tech game, and he's set to make his decision sometime after that. So I think it's big to get the last OV, and then he said that he'll probably make it for another game this season as well. It also helps that Florida State's defensive line is one of the top units in the country right now. And I think the development is obvious at that position, turning out talent like Jermaine Johnson, Jared Verse, who you turned into first-round picks, but also having Patrick Payton, Fabian Lovett, and Braden Fisk there as well. I go back and forth on who I think holds the lead in this one right now. Like I said, if he's a take at Georgia, I'd say he probably goes there. But Florida did gain some ground hosting him in for their big win over Tennessee. I think Florida State is still firmly in this one. They just need to get him back on campus and kind of blow away that Virginia Tech visit. And I think especially if they keep winning games and have the season we think they could end up having, you definitely see him ending up in this class. But you still got some very tough competition in Florida and Georgia. Jamari Howard is another one I think the staff is really working to land. He's a 4-star, top 100 defensive back out of South Florida. Florida State currently holds the lead on the On3 RPM machine and holds a crystal ball prediction from Steve Wolf on the 247 Sports. He's been to campus quite a bit over the last few months. He was previously committed to Michigan State before deciding to explore other options. I think this one quickly turned into an in-state battle between the big three, Florida State, Florida, and Miami. A few people still thought Michigan State was a threat to still end up getting him to recommit, but I think, especially now with them firing their head coach, Mel Tucker, we could probably count them out of this one. I do think Florida State holds the lead and all the momentum here. He was in Orlando for the LSU game as well. So I do think Florida and Miami are a bit on the back burner for him at this point. He's been expected to be at Florida quite a few times, but has yet to make it back. So I think that kind of points to the Gators not being quite a priority for him. That being said, I think this is a recruitment that neither side of Howard or Florida State want to rush. A lot of the experts see this being a December decision or even happening on early signing day, and I tend to agree. So I think it'll still be a while before he finally pops. I think Florida State is sitting in a really good spot here, and I think they ultimately do add him to an already very good defensive back haul in this class. Now, while still on the topic of DBs, there's quite a few targets out there, and I think defensive back slash corner slash safety maybe the biggest board right now for Florida State. We've mentioned guys like Jamari Howard, and that's also having 2 5-star guys in KJ Bolden and Charles Lester committed, alongside 4-star DB Ricky Knight. I think they do look to at least add one more, and I think the main one would probably be 4-star safety Zaquan Patterson, who recently committed to Miami. Now, that was a bit of a weird scenario because up until the morning of, I thought he was all Florida State, and it seemed kind of like everybody else did too. I even had a pre-recorded video discussing his commitment to FSU. Now, I've heard some weird things about handlers and kid having his phone taken away and all kinds of stuff like that. I have no idea how true any of that is, but it definitely seems like there's always some shady stuff around kids committing to Miami. Maybe that's a homer take, but I don't know. That being said, I don't think Florida State will stop pursuing him by any means, especially right now. And he said that he still has plans to visit Florida State at least a couple more times before signing day. So we'll definitely keep an eye out there. It definitely makes it a bit harder with Miami having the kind of season they're having so far. Granted, it's been against some pretty underwhelming competition, but, perception is reality. For the record here, I think Miami is a bit overhyped and gets exposed here in the next few weeks against some better teams. Now, there's also Zay Mincy, another 4-star DB. I think this has also come down to a Big 3 battle. I'd say Miami and Florida are a little ahead here. Florida State maybe running third. But it sounds like he'll be back on campus a few more times between here and signing day. So maybe you start to see a bigger push from Norvell and the staff. Kai Bates is another one, and I actually really like his tape. A 4-star DB out of Orlando, currently committed to LSU, but I wouldn't be surprised if he actually reopens his recruitment here in the next few weeks. Took an official visit to Florida State back in June, and I think throughout these next few weeks we'll at least see him take a few more visits, including at least 1 or 2 to Florida State, and probably 1 to Alabama as well. But that's another guy to monitor at DB. Obviously, Florida State doesn't land all these guys, but I think it's just safe to say that there's lots of very talented options here. Now, you guys may remember back in the summer when Florida State flipped 4-star offensive lineman Manassi Aitit from USC. Florida State is also in on another flip with 4-star offensive lineman Jason Zendamela out of Clearwater. Both guys were recruits that initially seemed like they would end up in FSU's class, and I know Atkins really likes them both in what has kind of been a down year at the offensive line position. They both seemingly kind of committed to USC out of nowhere, so potentially an emotional decision off a visit high. We've seen Florida State flip one of them already, and Zendamela is supposed to be back on campus sometime this season, so we'll see if Florida State can work to flip him as well. Either way, I think that one is far from over right now. Another offensive lineman you may start to hear more about in the next few weeks is 4-star Jordan Seaton out of IMG Academy. His name popped up recently and talks about setting up an official visit. Now, Florida State is definitely on the outside here right now. I'd say maybe Alabama or Tennessee have the momentum in that one. But if he does end up taking an OB to Tallahassee, you may see more of a push from the staff, and we all know how good of a recruiter Alex Atkins is. So I can definitely end up being one to keep an eye out for as well. Now, one position I know people are freaking out about is defensive line recruiting, in particular defensive tackle and linebacker. It's just not good there at the moment. There's no way to spin it. Especially with the way Florida State has developed defensive end over the last few years, having runs with Brian Burns, Jermaine Johnson, Jared Verse, and now Pat Payton. You'd think the high school recruiting would be better. I think it's frankly just Odell and Randy Shannon not focusing as much on recruiting as they should. These are older guys that are old school, and I think they prefer to just develop rather than chase 17-year-olds around. And I get that to a point, but as the position coach, you have to recruit your position. And we're just not seeing that at the moment. I think Odell's being negatively recruited by other staffs as he'll likely retire sometime soon. But all that being said, there are still a few names to watch out for at these positions. One would be defensive tackle Nasir Johnson, who's currently committed to Florida. I think this staff is still pursuing him, and I'd say he'll at least take one more visit to Florida State before it's over. A flip will be hard right now with how Florida's defense seems to be playing, but they do have a rough stretch coming up through the rest of the season, and if they don't meet expectations, you could see some parts of their class starting to reconsider. I think Florida State also sits in a good spot to flip Artavius Jones, who is a defensive tackle currently committed to Miami. That job also got harder with Miami looking pretty good so far this season, but I think Jones is considering Florida State a good bit, and I think you see him back on campus probably more than once. So you still have some options out there, maybe just not quite as good options as you should at this point. Like I said, I know it's been a bit slow recruiting wise just because Florida State hasn't played at home much. But as we go into this stretch, I think you can see visits starting to take off quite a bit. The Virginia Tech game could end up being a decent weekend, so could the Duke game. But I think that Miami game at Doak could be probably the biggest recruiting weekend of the cycle for Florida State. It wouldn't surprise me to see most of the guys I just listed in attendance for that one. So there's definitely still room for Florida State to make moves and make impressions on all these guys in between now and signing day. And I know a lot of these guys on this list are potential flip candidates rather than a straight up commitment. And I know that may even sound a bit discouraging. And obviously, you're not going to flip every target. But I think a lot of these guys, Florida State led for at one point. Guys like JoJo Trader, Jason Zandamilla, but then kind of committed to other programs out of the blue. You definitely don't like seeing that, but you got to remember these are still impressionable 17-year-old kids. And I think that went on a visit. They're having NIL thrown at them and all kinds of stuff. It's just easy to rush into an emotional decision. A lot of these other programs have set themselves up to get early visits in the spring and early in the summer, where I think Florida State is almost trying to play more of the long game. And in the world of recruiting now, where it seems like almost every big recruit flips at least once, it's hard to blame them for waiting until closer to the end of the cycle to use their momentum. Like I said, I think Florida State is definitely playing more of the long game with a lot of these guys, which I think helps them because it gives you more time to show off your on-field product, like going 4-0 with a couple of big wins under your belt. But also, it helps the staff kind of choose the guys that they really want, need, and that fit the program best. I think it's a strategy that is paying off. Now you see Florida State go from being ranked in the 20s in recruiting to now a top 6 class nationally, with some big targets still out there. So I definitely think Florida State finishes inside the top 5, but I'd say worst case scenario, they finish around 7 or 8, which is still super impressive, especially considering this team won 5 games 2 years ago. I do fully expect the recruiting buzz and news to be picking up here over the next several weeks. I wouldn't be surprised to see a few 24 guys and even a few 2025 kids jump on board here. And when it all does happen, we'll be sure to keep you guys updated on it, so make sure you're subscribed. I may even do a video list of some backup recruits that the staff may consider if some of these guys don't work out. Now, I know everyone wants Jeremiah Smith, and trust me, I do too. But if you had to pick one guy from this list outside of Jeremiah Smith for Florida State to land, who would it be and why? Let me know in the comments, and let's talk Noles.